Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is the third video of my YouTube series, and if you haven't watched the first two videos, I would recommend to watch them first before proceeding with this. Okay, in the first part of constructor, I have covered the basics of constructor, what are constructors, why it is used, and when they are called. In this part, we will discuss about different types of constructor. First is default constructor, parameterized constructor, copy constructor, private constructor, and static constructor. Default constructors are the most basic type of constructors. So when you declare a class and you do not explicitly write the constructor or define the constructor, compiler automatically provides this default constructor, which is implicit constructor. I think I have discussed this in the first part of the constructor also. Then what happens when you try to create the object, when you mention the new keyword, at that time if you haven't provide the constructor explicitly in your class, compiler provides a constructor which is called default constructor. These default constructors are public access. The modifier of default constructor are public and they are parameterless. Okay, and then we discussed, right? Default constructors are public. When a class does not have a constructor, then a default constructor gets called and the object is created. The second is parameterized constructor. Constructor with at least one parameter is called parameterized constructor. So while creating the object, if you are passing some value, here you can see the constructor is defined with the parameter. ID value is true value inside this demo. So it is called parameterized constructor. We will see the demo of all these constructor in a bit after going through the theory. The third one is copy constructor. This copy constructor is used to create an object by copying all of its variable from another object. So suppose if you have an object already in the system and you want to create another object with exactly the same value of the existing object, you use this copy constructor. Copy constructors are used for initializing a new object from an existing one. Then we have private constructors. Constructor preceded by private access modifier is called private constructor. With this word private, you would have already guessed that it is private and nobody other than the class members can access it because it is private. So you cannot actually create an object using this constructor, this private constructor. This private constructor can only be accessed inside the class. So a class with only private constructor cannot be inherited, because when we inherit a class, our subclass, when you try to create the object of your subclass, the superclass constructor gets called, and that is not possible with private constructor. We will discuss about this in some other video. It's a different topic altogether, so we will properly make a video on this. So for now, just understand that private constructor, any class which has only private constructor cannot be inherited. Then it is possible to instantiate a class with only a private constructor, provided it has a static member function which creates an object of the class. So what happens, how will you create, there has to be some way to create the object if your class has only private constructor, right? So in that scenario, what we can do is, inside the class we can create a static member, and because as you already know that a static member can be called through the class name directly and it does not require any object. So what we do is we call this a static member outside the class, and inside my static function I'll instantiate this object and return the object. Okay, this is how you will create the object. Or the other way is, um, in addition to this private constructor, you also have a public constructor. In that scenario, you can create the object. Then we have static constructors. Static constructors is invoked only once for all the objects of the class, and it is invoked during the creation of first object of the class, right? So what does this static constructor do? It is used for instantiating the static members of the class. Okay, and it is called only once. So suppose if you are creating 5 different objects, only when you created the first object, this static constructor was called first, and then the normal constructor was called for creating the object. But when you created the second object, that time, because the static constructor was called first time only, and the static variables are instantiated already, so we do not need to call the static constructor again. So when you create the second object, this static constructor is not called. In a class, only one static constructor is allowed. Static constructor will invoke automatically whenever we create the first instance of a class. It is used to initialize static fields of the class. Okay, if you have any question on this, please put it in the comment section. I will get back to you. Now let's go ahead and check the demo.
This is a very basic application to show you how the constructors are working. Okay, this has only ID and is true. These two variables inside the class. None of the constructors we have mentioned here. So first of all, we will try to create the object without mentioning any constructor inside it and see how what happens. Here we are trying to call the demo constructor, but this class does not have any constructor. So in this scenario, when the compiler sees that there is no constructor, it provides the default constructor. Okay, so this ID and is true. The default values are provided by the compiler, by the default constructor. Okay, one interesting thing about the default constructor is that if you provide any other constructor inside the class, this default constructor is not going to work. For example, now this is your parameterized constructor. This is my parametrized constructor. Let me uncomment this. Okay. Now if we are trying to call, now if we are trying to call the default constructor, see it's throwing the error that this constructor is expecting ID value and is true val inside as a parameter. So you cannot call default constructor if there is a constructor already you have mentioned here. So in that scenario, if you want this statement to work, you have to explicitly mention the default constructor here. So if I uncomment this is my default constructor. It is not expecting any parameter in this scenario. These both two statements will work. Okay, let's see. Okay, explicitly parameterized called 10 and true. See, these two values are also printed and these two values are also printed, right? Both the objects are created. But if I remove this, sorry, I think it got hanged. Okay. So in this scenario, it will throw error and it won't work. See, there was build error. Okay. Okay, so we covered default constructor and parameterized constructor. Let's go ahead with the copy constructor. Now, let's uncomment this. Sorry, comment this. Or remove it. Okay, this is my copy constructor. Copy constructor means that it will we will pass the existing object and it will create a new object, and it will create the new object according to the object you have passed. The values will be same. So I'm going to call demo. Okay, here we have created one object, right? Here we have one object already created. Now I'm going to call the copy constructor of obj copy constructor new demo. I am going to pass obj1. Okay, and let's print the values again. Okay, let's try this. Explicit and parameterized is called. The value is 10 and true. Then copy constructor is called. Again, the value is 10 and true because the object we have passed has id as 10 and is true. So the same value is copied in the new object through copy constructor. Okay. Then constructor. It is very important. Let's uncomment this also. Okay. And I'm going to remove all the other constructors. Or remove, 1 second. Let's remove this. Okay, now you have private constructor. What does that mean? Now if you try to, let's remove this also. Now we are trying to create the object. Obj private is equals to new demo. You see there is one error. Why? Because demo is inaccessible due to its protection level. That means you cannot call the constructor out of the class because it is a private constructor. So what is the way? How will we create the object for this class now? One way is you can add a new member, public static demo obj private. Okay, and I'm going to call, I'm going to write a new function, static function, new static get object. Okay, and I'm going to initialize this obj private here. It's equals to new demo. We can call this constructor inside the class. So I have created, sorry, I will return this object now. Okay, so I'm going to return this. So return obj private, and we are done. So for creating the object with with private constructor, we are going to call this a static method directly. So demo dot get object. Okay, now console dot write line obj private dot, did I do something wrong? Yes, obj private dot id. Similarly, is true. Okay, and console dot read line, done. Cool. Now let's run the application. Now you see it is a private constructor we have called, and 0 and false is printed, which is the default value of both. So this is how you can actually access the private constructor. Okay, the other constructor is the static constructor. So this is a static constructor, static demo. Okay, one thing about the static constructors are that it cannot have any access modifier. So we cannot mention any public, private, any access modifier in this. Okay, so and static constructors are called only once. So first time when you are creating, when you have started the application and the first time you are creating the object of this class, demo class, that time the static constructor will be called, and then for the rest of the objects when you are creating, it will not be called. Okay, we will see it in a bit. Yes, so here I have created one demo or one object from demo. Okay, in this scenario, because we are calling it for the first time, the static constructor will be called, and then the values will be printed. Next time when we are creating the object, this time the static constructor will not be called. I've put a debugger here. Let's put the debugger here. We'll see how many times it gets hit. Okay, starting the application. Now you see first time it came here, static constructor, and the value is set to Tanya. The value is 1 true and Tanya. Okay. Next time this is called, but it did not hit the static constructor again, but the value is still printed as Tanya. Okay, so this is how the static constructor works. Okay, also one more point. I mentioned earlier that if you provide any constructor inside your class, the default constructor will not work. But in case of a static constructor, the default constructor will come. Why? Because static constructors are only initializing the static members of the class, but for initializing the other members there has to be some constructor. So if you are not providing any constructor, it will provide, the compiler will provide a default constructor in this scenario. Okay, I hope everything is clear to you, but if you have any doubt you can mention it in the comment section and I will try to answer it as soon as possible. Also please subscribe, like, and press the bell icon if you like the video. Thank you so much.